A word of warning, this podcast explores graphic and disturbing stories and includes some strong language. It therefore may not be suitable for our young listeners or other folks who may find it disturbing.
Hello and welcome to the Sidebar presented by True Crime News, taking you inside the courtrooms of high-profile and notorious cases from across the country. I'm your host, Joshua Ritter. I'm a criminal defense lawyer based in Los Angeles and previously an LA County prosecutor for nearly a decade. You can find me on all social media at Joshua Ritter ESQ or at joshuaritter.com. We are recording this on Friday, June 21st, 2024. In this week's episode, an alleged killer appears in court for the murder of a toddler in the parking lot of a supermarket. Plus, a plastic surgeon charged in the death of a patient after operating on his own wife. But first, conspiracy theories potentially gain traction in the murder trial of a woman accused of her police officer boyfriend's death as jurors hear shocking texts from a lead investigator in the case. Today, we are very happy to be joined by Skye Lazaro, a criminal defense attorney and legal analyst you can find on multiple media outlets. Skye, welcome.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. Skye, before we get into this, and I talked to you a little bit about this before, but listeners are likely going to recognize you from the time that you represented Corey Richins. She's the Utah woman accused of poisoning her husband and then notoriously writing a children's grief book about it, which I think why most people know about the case. I'm not going to put you on the spot. I don't want to make you uncomfortable with any kind of attorney-client issues. But one thing I was hoping you could clear up for our audience is that you recently withdrew from the case. And there has been a lot of speculation as to why that is in the media. But I know that you have a really straightforward and simple answer to that. Do you mind sharing that with us?
Not at all. I do. Our firm represented Ms. Richins in the estate cases on the civil side of things following her husband's passing away. There was a conflict that arose within the firm in that case that was irreconcilable and ultimately conflicted the entire firm off. So really had nothing to do with me.
Good. And thank you for clearing that up. People hear that and they think there must be some sort of turmoil between the attorney and the client, but this is something that happens sometimes, folks. It's just something you can't control. It's a conflict. You have to protect the interests of everybody involved. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Happy to keep the record clear.
Good. And I've been looking forward to this too, because I know that you follow these cases closely. I've seen a lot of your commentary on some of them on the news. So let's jump right into this first really awful case out of Denham, Massachusetts, where the trial of a woman charged with the murder of her police officer boyfriend carries on as jurors hear disturbing texts from a lead investigator in the case. Karen Reed is facing a charge of second-degree murder in the death of her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, with prosecutors alleging Reed hit the man with her car before leaving him to die in the snow. Reed's supporters and defense have a very different perspective, claiming that the woman is the victim of a broad police cover-up, alleging that O'Keefe was killed in the home of another officer before Reed was scapegoated for the murder. For Reed's supporters and conspiracy theorists, Reed's defense scored a major win last week when texts from a state trooper, the lead investigator in the case, were read to the jury containing demeaning messages about Reed. Trooper John Proctor admitted to speaking with friends, fellow officers, and even supervisors in various exchanges referencing Reed's body and calling her a, quote, babe. At one point, even telling a superior that he searched her phone for nudes during the course of the investigation. In additional messages, Proctor referred to Reed as a, quote, whack job and even told his sister that he hoped the woman would kill herself. Despite admitting to the appalling behavior, Proctor testified that his actions had no bearing on the criminal investigation. This week, the tables were turned when voicemails left by Reed for O'Keefe were played for the jury. The profanity-filled voicemails indicated Reed and O'Keefe were likely engaged in a heated argument moments before she allegedly dropped him off at the location his body was eventually found. In the voicemails, Reed is heard to call O'Keefe a effing pervert. She obviously didn't use the word effing. You can use your imagination. And a loser. The trial is ongoing, and as the fireworks unfold, one question still looming is whether Reed herself will testify in her defense after the defendant told media outlets that she would be willing to take the stand if necessary. Skye, I want to talk about this last part first because this was funny to me. She did this kind of impromptu, Karen Reed, press conference outside of the courtroom and courthouse. And this case has a frenzy of media attention, especially in Massachusetts. Every single day, there's a crowd of people that they walk through, the defense team. And many times they're asked questions by the press. And this time she answered some questions, including kind of indicating she is happy and willing to take the stand, but she'll leave it up to her attorneys. You think that's actually going to happen, or what is your take on her statements outside the courthouse?
I actually don't hate her statements. Generally, I prefer that my clients say nothing ever to anyone.
Yeah.
Hard to control, easier said than done. But ultimately, I don't think she takes the stand. I think this case is going as good as it possibly can for the defense right now. And unless something goes haywire, they gain nothing by putting her up there. What's she going to say? I didn't do it, and open herself up to cross-examination of all this stuff. I don't think that that's helpful to them. However, I think by her just kind of quipping that as she walks by or making that statement, it also signals that, hey, I have nothing to hide. It's up to my lawyers whether or not I actually get up there, but I'm willing to get up and tell my side. So yeah. I don't hate that.
I agree with you. And I also think it was likely a prepared moment, right. Meaning they knew that opportunity would present itself and she would take advantage of it, because this, like no case I've seen in a while, is really being tried in the court of public opinion as well. And she knows that, and she wants to get the word out there that she's happy to take the stand. But I agree with you. What advantage is she going to get out of this? I mean, it's so difficult to see where she could score additional points that they haven't already scored. The only thing I could think of is that those statements that she allegedly made of, I hit him, perhaps she would have an answer to that. You think that would be worth it?
She has if there is a good answer.
Right.
And sometimes I've had this come up in cases where people are accused of something or confronted with something, and the recording doesn't necessarily reflect what was actually happening. When you take it in context of what it was like, her plausible response could be, what do you mean I hit him? I hit him? Like, right. I think it depends on context.
Inflection,
those types of things. But she's going to have to, it depends on what kind of witness she's going to be. If she's not a likable witness, I don't think you run the risk, because I think if she gets up and people don't like her personality or don't like the way she comes across for any reason, the negative impact on her, I think, far outweighs any benefit you get from being able to explain something like that.
I agree with you 100%. I don't see any upside and only downside to her testifying. And like you said, her defense team has done a really good job here of of answering a lot of questions the prosecution has presented. And I think that they would only have all of that to lose rather than anything to gain. Let's jump into these text messages, though, because this was something that a lot of people responded to. Trooper Proctor is the lead investigator. His phone was turned over to the defense. They went through everything, and they found some really ugly, they're vile messages that he's saying. He's using language that I'm not going to use here. Really strong language, really kind of disgusting comments about her and her medical conditions and everything else. My first question to you is that enough to say, this guy's so awful and I so don't like him just as a person that I'm not going to believe any of the work he did as a cop. In other words, throw the baby out with the bathwater. If this is who's leading your investigation, I don't want to hear any more from you. Do you think jurors might respond that way?
I don't know that they would go that far to just say, because I don't like him, or, he's a vile person, or he, says terrible things about her, that's enough. I think in the context of everything else that's going on in this case, it actually will have an effect on them. I think generally people want to believe that law enforcement is out to do the right thing. They're out to get the truth. I mean, I ask jurors this all the time, and people want to trust law enforcement, although that may be changing in the country. But I think generally speaking, people want to believe that these people are out to investigate and figure out what the truth is and what happened. And when you have your lead investigator saying things like that, I think it becomes very difficult to look at everything else he did and say, take all this aside. I mean, clearly he has a thing against her, or for her and then against her. I mean, however you want to look at it, right? And then say, but he's going to be objective and just follow the evidence. I think that casts a lot of doubt on his investigation and the things he did.
Yeah, especially too when you realize that the entire defense theory is putting the police as the defendant, is making them the villains in this whole thing. And so that, with that type of a theory, now they present this guy who's got a lot of bad stuff on him. I think you're right. Maybe if he were the anomaly in this entire case, but the way that the defense has painted this, it's like the whole department is crooked. Okay.
Yeah, he's become the face of the department.
Right.
Really. I mean, they're saying he killed him and framed her. And, the guy that they put up to lead the investigation is at the very best unprofessional and, potentially worse.
Yeah. No, through all the trial until he testified, all we heard about was Trooper Proctor, Trooper Proctor, Trooper Proctor, and then he takes the stand and he's about as bad as everybody had anticipated. It was definitely a good week for the defense. Mm-hmm. But turning now to this week, we've gotten more into kind of the forensic evidence presented by the prosecution, and one of those that they presented are these voicemails that Reed allegedly left within minutes of whether you believe she hit him with the car or whether you believe she just simply dropped him off. What is not really being disputed is that these voicemails were left close in time to that. And she is screaming at him and she's using profanity and she's cursing him out and everything else. And I'm wondering, do you think this is starting to make some headway into presenting some sort of a motive to the jurors?
I think it certainly can. I think whenever you can show that there was some sort of disagreement going on between two individuals and then someone ends up dead, it's certainly adds some credibility to the state's theory that she was upset with him, and it sheds some light into where she's yelling and using profanities, maybe what her personality is. If she's crying and you broke my heart and I'm so sad, that it becomes harder to believe. I think that you're going to hit someone with a car when you're screaming at them and calling them names. Maybe you're upset.
Yeah. Very, very good point. Yeah. Maybe it shows a little bit, sheds some light on her, how she responds to conflict more than anything else. Yeah. Very good point. I mean, you made me think about this too. It may not be something that the jurors are going to hang their hats on as far as like, oh, well, that's why she killed him. Mm-hmm. But it's certainly not a message like, hey, I had so much fun tonight. So glad I could see you. Can't wait for you to come home.
Baby.
Right. I'll have dinner waiting for you. Loved seeing you again. It's none of that. So it certainly is not helpful to the defense, if anything, but I don't know if it's what's going to push people over the edge, but
I don't either. And I might have missed this part. Because I missed some yesterday. I was in court most of the day. But if those were so close in time, I mean, she's talking about being either with his child or his niece and having them with him. And I don't know if that was ever fleshed out in the questioning or if they just sort of like brushed by it and ignored it.
What we do know is that she, according to the prosecution, well, and I think even according to the defense, is that she, after whatever happened at the home where he was found, she did return to his home with his children and stayed there. And I think one thing that I didn't see fleshed out, I don't know if the defense is going to touch on this, but in the messages, even as she gets more irritated, one thing she continues to say is, "Where are you?" Which to me, either she's very diabolical and knows exactly where he is,
right,
or she really doesn't know, which might, is going to present problems for the prosecution as far as her intent. It may not, they may say, well, listen, that does, she still could have hit him and wondered where he is and why he's not calling her back. But it seems to me it would lend itself more towards this idea that it might have been accidental, if anything, at the very worst. What do you think?
I would agree with that. I mean, unless she is so smart that she knew she hit him and then went back and set this up, although I don't think she'd be saying, I don't know if it quite squares. If she did it and she was trying to use the text messages to establish some sort of alibi, I'm not sure if she thought that through, she would have used the language she used and been as angry as she was.
Yeah.
So I actually think
they sound authentic. You're right. They sound like authentic.
She's clearly upset.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, it actually lends more credence towards the part of, maybe she accidentally hit him and maybe she didn't realize it, or maybe she didn't at all. And then she's, where are you? What are you doing? You're not calling me back. So I think that's somewhat helpful to her, hurtful in maybe the context of her attitude, helpful in maybe the context of her not knowing what happened.
Yeah. Well, I'll put it to you this way. We're several weeks in. We're almost to the end of the case, and I don't know what happened. So these jurors have quite a job ahead of them, and I do not envy
rested. Them. So we're not going to get probably a whole lot more on what happened.
The defense is into their case as of this recording, and we might have closing arguments by as early as next week. So we will, of course, keep everyone updated. It's turned into a really fascinating case, and I'm very curious to see how this all works itself out.
You hear us talk about all sorts of crime here on True Crime News, and you know that the world can be a dangerous and unpredictable place. With every case that I've covered, I've learned one thing, that your best line of defense is vigilance and preparation. That's why I recommend Simply Safe Home Security, advanced home security that puts you first. Summer is officially here, which means it is prime time for vacations and weekend getaways. While relaxing, it can mean being away from your home for several hours or even days. As I get ready to unwind for summer vacation, I feel comfortable knowing my house is guarded by Simply Safe. It is one less thing for me to worry about, making my time away even more relaxing. There are a lot of security systems out there, but Simply Safe is easy to use, it's cost effective, and it works. Named Best Home Security System of 2024 for 5 years running by U.S. News and World Report, Simply Safe can protect your whole home. Simply Safe offers advanced home security and 24/7 monitoring that is accessible to all with upfront costs and monitoring plans for less than $1 a day. Plus, there are no long-term contracts. You can cancel anytime, penalty-free. By partnering with Simply Safe, I've finally gotten real peace of mind, and I want you to have it too. Get an exclusive 20% off any new Simply Safe system when you sign up for Fast Protect monitoring. Just visit simplysafe.com/truecrime. That's simplysafe.com/truecrime. There's no safe like Simply Safe.
Let us turn to Cleveland, Ohio, where a woman's mental health is likely to feature heavily in a potential trial for the murder of a 3-year-old boy. and the attack on his mother. Bianca Ellis is facing a number of charges, including aggravated murder and felonious assault for the stabbing of Julian Wood and his mother, Margot Wood, who were attacked in the parking lot of their local grocery store. Responders to the scene reportedly found Ellis walking in the facility holding a knife. Meanwhile, the boy and his mother were rushed to the hospital where Julian would not survive. Ellis has made a number of unsettling statements since her arrest, according to law enforcement, including confessing to a murder in California, which police say never happened. According to Ellis's mother, the woman had a long history of mental health issues, including hallucinations, and had previously taken medications. However, they were reportedly ineffective. While in court for a pretrial hearing last week, Ellis was seen rocking back and forth in her chair while staring around the room and laughing, causing the judge to seek a mental health evaluation for the woman. Proceedings will be delayed until a ruling is made on the woman's competency. However, we will continue to update you in the quest for justice after this tragic loss of life. This case is just disturbing beyond belief. It's really nightmare fuel to think that you can just have your little one with you, be going to the grocery store like you do any other day, and some person just randomly comes along and stabs this poor kid. This one kept me up. Yeah. But it makes me wonder if this woman had demonstrated such mental health issues for a while, why wasn't more done by the system? In other words, why isn't she in some facility? Why wasn't there more intervention? It comes down to that same question when we see in these tragedies, did the system fail this child and his mother in this case? What are your thoughts?
I think it's clear there's some mental health problems here, whether or not they rise to competency. As you know, that's beyond my expertise and yours. Yeah. These are the hardest cases, and this is not isolated to Ohio. This happens, I think, across the country. And this is something we deal with, up at the legislature when we're talking about resources and what to do with people and legislation and funding every single year. And I don't think anybody does enough. I think we can all agree that there just isn't enough. There isn't enough resources. I see cases like that, not to this level of tragedy, but I see these people who are severely mentally ill, committing crimes and, going to jail and getting out and becoming this revolving door, and nothing happens, or it seems like it takes something like this before, or a major felony before it's like, okay, well, now we need to run competency because maybe this person needs to be at the state hospital, or maybe this person needs to be force medicated. But up until then, I see over and over again, like Class B misdemeanors or low-level misdemeanors where nobody wants to spend the resources, and they're probably public defender cases. State doesn't want to spend the resources in order to do the evaluations or put this person in treatment or forced treatment. So unfortunately, I think the possibility of these things happening are pretty great, unfortunately, in a lot of places.
Yeah, it's a really sad situation. Like you said, it occurs across the country. Here where I live in Los Angeles, really a problem too, because you don't want to fill up the jails with just people who are suffering from mental health issues, right? They need help, not necessarily confinement. But what do you do if where do you put these people, and how do you? Are you able to force them to receive treatment? It's a bunch of questions that are far above my pay grade, but obviously in a situation like this, I agree with you. Something fell apart, and it seems like this could have been avoided. Talk to us a little bit though about the idea of competency, because that's different from what we might think of as like somebody who's going to take a plea to say that they were insane. Competency is just about their ability to stand trial. Can you weigh in on that for us?
I can. And it sounds like in this case, I don't know that the judge has gone quite that far in ordering a competency evaluation. I know a mental health evaluation was ordered, and that might shed some light on what you do next. Competency, though, is, under the United States Constitution and probably every state constitution, we don't prosecute people who aren't legally competent. So that is, they have to understand what they're being charged with. They have to understand the process. They have to understand the seriousness of it, be able to participate in their own defense. And that usually takes I think everybody has a little bit different process, but you'll have two evaluators look at it. So it's not just one person saying this person isn't competent. And then the court makes an order. And if a person's ruled incompetent, the prosecution can't go forward. That person usually ends up at the state hospital to see if they can be restored through medication and then come back and stand trial. If it's just a mental health or defect defense, that just plays into almost a sentencing type role. Like the person would be charged with a lesser offense or would be sentenced differently based on their mental illness.
Yeah. No, that was very great explanation. Thank you for that. And I think one thing I would want to make clear to listeners too is just because someone is found to not be competent, it is not like what we hear of when we say, oh, they were found not guilty by reason of insanity. That does not end the criminal proceedings for them. That just pauses them. And they can be deemed competent again, and then the trial proceedings are back in effect, and they're heading toward trial, and they can go back into incompetency. And you see this sometimes where people go back and forth between competency, and like you said, it's not as high a standard. It's just kind of, do they understand what's going on, and can they speak with their attorney? And if they can, then they're heading toward trial. And at trial, in a case like this, I wouldn't be surprised. You might see an insanity defense, but a whole different type of argument and standard for that. Yeah, really, really troubling case. I can't imagine there's going to be much difficulty with this at trial. Again, it's gonna keep me up for a while to just think about with everything you have to worry about as a parent. Walking to the grocery store is not high on my list, and now something like this happens.
Yeah, it's everyone's worst nightmare, I think, and the complete unexpected. It's sad all around. It's sad for everyone involved.
Yeah, very sad. Let us move to Gulf Breeze, Florida, where a plastic surgeon faces charges for the death of a patient that just happened to be his own wife. Dr. Benjamin Brown was charged with manslaughter by culpable negligence and second-degree felony homicide in the death of his wife, Hillary Ellington Brown. The woman became unresponsive after suffering seizures while undergoing the multiple cosmetic procedures. Brown allegedly allowed his wife to participate in her own procedures, even prepping her own IV and anesthesia, reportedly by taking Valium and a cocktail of other medications. His wife, by the way, was not a trained medical professional. When the woman began spasming, Brown's assistant asked if they should call an ambulance. Brown allegedly said no, waiting between 10 to 20 minutes before contacting 911. Hillary was eventually rushed to a hospital and placed on life support, dying just a week later. While Brown has not yet entered a plea on the charges, his defense attorney has indicated he will be fighting the allegations. Skye, this is a weird one to me. It's surprising because it is not a clear-cut case, and no pun intended there at all. But performing surgery on your spouse, by the way, is not a violation of Florida law. But where do you think, because accidents and horrible things happen in operating rooms all the time. What do you think tipped the scales here for the DA to press charges?
I think that's a tough question. My guess is it was the amount of time he waited and didn't do anything.
Yeah.
I can't, unless there's something else that they've seen messages between the two or something he'd done otherwise that we're not privy to yet. Looking at it with just what we know in this case, that to me is probably what did it. Is this is your wife of all people.
Yeah.
I mean, one, I think it's a terrible practice, but I was reading about it and it sounds like it's quite common. As a lawyer, I'd never represent anyone I was friends with, knew anything else, because things go wrong.
Right.
But, in this one, this is weird. And letting her put together the drugs, I think the lidocaine being at issue, that he continued to push lidocaine and then waited and told staff, let's just wait. That to me seems to be the deciding factor. And he's not charged with premeditated murder.
No. Good point. Yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, it's kind of a little bit of awful all the way around. The idea that he's allowing her to participate in the procedure, just bizarre. Not necessarily criminal, but certainly bizarre. The waiting period of time, again, looks awful. I don't know if that itself is criminal, but I think you're probably right that we don't know enough about this, and there might be investigation done. And was there some sort of animosity, life insurance, what have you? I feel like something might come out to explain a little bit more why they made this case criminal rather than civil. I mean, it easily could be a lawsuit of her estate against him, but
at the very least, this guy's medical license has got to be gone, whether he's charged or not. I think allowing someone, your spouse or not, I don't care who it is, that is not trained and not part of the procedure to put together the drugs, the Valium and cocktail aside, right? Just the other drugs that are necessary for the procedure, to have someone do that that's not licensed and trained to do that seems to me to be a huge problem. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you to put your defense attorney hat squarely on your head. And if this is all that we know, if everything we know right now is everything, what is his best defense? What are the arguments that you think his attorneys will make?
Looking at just what we have right now, I think you go back and look at her and say she was involved in the practice. Whether she was trained or not, she knows how these drugs interact with each other. And perhaps this was a suicide attempt on her part.
Wow. Interesting.
Taking Valium and alcohol prior to going under general anesthesia, if she'd been around the practice, my guess is you could make an argument that she'd have at least read the forms that say you shouldn't do that you run the risk of your heart stopping, which is what happened to her, and spin it that way.
Yeah. No, or it's
just an accident. He didn't know she took the Valium, and it was just an accident. And in his experience, he's seen this before because he's a surgeon. And sometimes people go through a period and then come back
and recover,
or whatever it is. I've actually seen a couple of these cases, not that were charged criminally, but on the civil side, where it was actually a plastic surgeon who was charged in a case where a patient died, and it was a similar incident. And she testified and said, look, like, sometimes this happens. People's heart rates drop. That's common. I've done so many surgeries. I've seen this, and then people bounce back. So you wait, a short period of time to see if that happens before you start calling 911.
Yeah.
I think the fact that he kept pushing lidocaine is a problem. But if she's also cut open, you don't want people waking up in a ton of pain, and freaking out. So
yeah, our reaction to it may be very different than what a medical professional's reaction to what was taking place. I can't imagine a medical professional taking no issue with the fact that the patient is participating in the procedure, but the idea of waiting may not be as outrageous to them as it is to us. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that kind of assumption of risk, sort of a defense on her part that, listen, if you're holding him responsible for some sort of negligence-based homicide here, well, she's part of the negligence and she had assumed it herself. Crazy case, though. Really, really, every time you feel like you haven't heard it before, then all of a sudden you find out about a new case. But That is our show for this week. Skye, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. Tell us, where can people find out more about you?
Thank you. And it's so great to always do these shows with you. I love your perspective on everything. So thanks for having me. I have a firm website, Ray Quinney and Nevaker here in Utah. You can find me on LinkedIn. I also have Instagram and Facebook. If you have at all a love for horses, you can go watch all my horse videos.
Fantastic. Okay, great. I will do that. I am your host, Joshua Ritter. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Joshua Ritter ESQ. And if you want to hear my thoughts and coverage on even more true crime cases, please check out my new YouTube channel, Courtroom Confidential. As always, you can find our Sidebar episodes wherever you get your podcasts, and we want to hear from you. If you've got questions or comments you would like us to address, tweet us your questions with the hashtag TCN Sidebar. And thank you again for joining us at the True Crime News Sidebar.